Hello, my name is Steve Kaufman, and I'm a doctoral candidate at North Carolina State University in the Department of Psychology. And today I'd like to talk to you about a study that we did, driver logo sign detection and hazard responses during partially automated driving. This study was done in collaboration with our Department of Industrial Systems Engineering, the Institute for Transportation Research and Education, along with the North Carolina Department of Transportation, as well as the Industrial Systems Engineering Department at the University of Florida. To start with, autonomous vehicles are becoming a lot more prevalent on the road. As time has gone on, more and more vehicles are having technologies such as active lane keeping, adaptive cruise control, blind spot warnings, etc. And many cars today have all of these technologies built into them. And some speculate that these new technologies could eliminate up to 90% of human error-related accidents when they're equipped with these driving assistance technologies. And while this does sound great, this also introduces some safety concerns because when you add in these automated technologies, the driver becomes disconnected from the task of driving. And this becomes a problem when the automation can't handle many scenarios. So the driver has to reassume control of the vehicle and then respond to a hazard, and which can be a dangerous scenario. Um, in-vehicle displays are in pretty much every new vehicle these days. They've emerged as the primary method of communicating vehicle information to the driver. And so an in-vehicle display can communicate information such as hazard information, navigation information, environment information, and it can also display what the vehicle state is under varying levels of automation. And many of the studies on in-vehicle displays have focused primarily on safety-related information, such as forward collision warnings. However, there have been some studies that have focused on non-safety related information, such as road signs, but the focus of these studies was more on the format of the information than on anything else. And so our study wanted to investigate the presentation of non-safety related information, such as service signs under partial vehicle automation. Um, and so our hypotheses for the study were the presence of sign information during a hazard would result in more crashes. An in-vehicle display would improve hazard negotiation compared to an on-road sign presentation or both at the same time. We also believed that presenting text and logos at the same time would make hazard negotiations worse than just a simple logo presentation. And then we also expected that older drivers would perform the worst compared to middle-aged and younger drivers. And so for this study, we had 36 participants, all had a valid driver's license, and all had normal or corrected the normal vision. And our sample was balanced across age and gender. We had 3 age groups, younger, middle-aged, and older drivers. The younger drivers were 18 to 23 years old. The middle-aged drivers were 24 to 64 years old, and older drivers were 65 or older. And our driving simulator was shown in the pictures to the right. We used a Form 8 motion-based simulator, which means that our driving simulator cab was mounted on a platform that was seated on a hydraulics platform so that the simulator itself could simulate the forces that a driver would experience in a car while driving. It also had a full 360-degree field of view as well. And then in the cab, we placed a 10.5-inch Windows tablet so that we could simulate an in-vehicle display. As that's seen right here, that's the in-vehicle display there in the center console. So our study used a 2x3x3 mixed factorial design, and our factors were information load. So the signs either had logo or logo plus text, which is shown to the right. So on the top, we have a logo plus text presentation of the signs, and on the bottom is a logo only presentation. We had information source, which is on-road, in-vehicle, or both. And so for the on-road presentations, these are the signs on the left side here. These are both what the on-road signs would look like. They're just typical blue service signs that you would see on a US highway. And then on the in-vehicle display, we see the same information just placed on a screen next to the navigation information. And then our 3 age groups, like I said, were younger, middle-aged, and older drivers. Each driver completed 6 drives total, and the order of the drives was counterbalanced using a Latin squares method. And then our outcome measures were hazard response, which was crash rate and brake response time, and then also sign detection. So during each drive, drivers were presented with the signs, and they were called out. They were given a target logo to look for each drive, and as they were presented blue signs, they would say yes or no whether they saw the target sign. And so the vehicle that they were driving in had level 2 automation, which means that it had active lane keeping and adaptive cruise control, which means that drivers could theoretically have hands off of the steering wheel and just keep their eyes on the road. However, hazards were placed during the drives. And what they were driving on was a standard 4-lane US highway, so 2 lanes going each direction. There were 3 interchanges per drive, and there were 5 or 7 hazards per drive. So 2 of the hazards occurred at logo sign locations, and then 3 of the total hazards were not handled by automation. So the automation failed at those 3 hazards, and then the driver had to respond to the hazard itself. And so getting into the results, what we found is that drivers were less likely to provide a correct response during logo plus text conditions compared to logo only. So if you'll remember, sign detection is they just called yes or no whether they saw a target logo or not. And so here, drivers were less likely to provide a correct response during logo plus text conditions, and the percentages are down on this table on the bottom. So people in logo plus text conditions responded 94% correctly compared to 98% with the logo only. In terms of the information source, the simultaneous presentation or both led to the highest detection rate. So here in this top row, people responded 99% correctly when it was the sign information was presented on both on-road and in the in-vehicle display compared to one or the other. And then older drivers here were less accurate than younger and middle-aged drivers. So there's about a 3 to 4% difference in the response rate between older adults and then younger and middle-aged adults. In terms of crash rate, that's just the percentage of times participants, or the number of times participants crashed during the drives. And so we find that crashes were more likely when a logo sign was present, and especially when the signs were presented on road. So here, this bar right here, this is an on-road presentation during a sign present. And here we see that the crash rate is above 15. And that's dramatically different than, or dramatically more than the both or in-vehicle display conditions. We also see that the in-vehicle display crash rate remained unchanged between sign present or sign absent. So it didn't really matter whether a sign was present during the in-vehicle display conditions. The crash rate remained relatively unchanged between the two. And then when signs were presented on both, the crash rate was slightly higher than the in-vehicle display. So we see that when the sign was absent, the crash rate between both and the in-vehicle display is about the same, but then once we go to a sign present, the crash rate increases for both presentation. Now, in terms of hazard response time, drivers did take longer when logo signs were present. They took longer to press the brake, which is what hazard response indicates. We also see that drivers were fastest at responding when information was presented on both simultaneously. So when people saw information on both on-road and in the in-vehicle display, that was when they were fastest at braking, particularly in the sign present condition. In the sign absent condition, the 3 information source factors are pretty much the same. We also saw that there were no significant age group differences or information load differences. And in terms of information load differences, that might be because there's not a huge difference in information load between logo and logo plus text. So a larger difference in information load might show differences there. And so our results suggest that there's a general cost of processing the logo information for the driver. We see that there are more crashes when the signs are present. We also see that the cost might be alleviated by the simultaneous presentation of the on-road or in-vehicle sign information. When talking to participants kind of after the drives, they did note that they used the in-vehicle presentation as kind of a cue for timing and for timing the allocation of attention to the on-road sign. However, this needs further examination. We also saw that older drivers were less accurate at sign detection. And this suggests that there's a potential trade-off between sign detection and driving, where older drivers will prioritize the driving task over the sign detection task. In terms of limitations, the in-vehicle display for our study showed static images instead of dynamically presenting navigation information. So that's something that might be changed in a future study. We also saw that middle-aged drivers covered a pretty broad span of ages, so there may be more heterogeneity in this age group. However, the mean age for this group, I think, was roughly 40 years old. So it does fit kind of squarely in the middle between 18 to 23 and 65 and older. This study also focused on partial automation and not more full automation like level 3 or level 4, which is kind of the trend of where vehicles are going to these days. In terms of future directions, we wanted to examine driver glance behaviors when viewing signs and negotiating hazards, and we did actually collect eye tracking data, but this was not reported in this paper. However, we do plan to analyze that and present that at a different time. We also want to expand the focus here to other non-safety related information. And so thank you for listening to my talk. Just wanted to acknowledge that the study was supported by a grant from the North Carolina Department of Transportation, and we wanted to thank Joseph Hummer and Renee Roach for project feedback from the Steering and Implementation Committee. And we also want to thank May Lau, James Shirley, and Hillary Jackson for their efforts on the project as well. And here are the references. Thank you. Have a good day.